Hola, this is Anton, and you're watching Foreign Antoons. We have covered animation history of Russia, France, Italy, Germany, England, and this time we will enter the bullfighting and flamenco dancing land of Spain, or as they have referred to it, España. We will be diving into many of the Spaniards' contributions, figuring out their own techniques and developing their craft in animation. And before we begin, just a disclaimer for those new to these animation history series. So if you are confused on why I don't show any emotions while I talk, the reason why I sound monotone is because I live in the land of Estonia, where people's speech is as exciting as listening to a stone rather, because Estonia. Also, it's important to understand the history of Spain before trying to understand its art and animation. Since it's so big, however, talking about it would take another whole video, but let's go over the main key points of the most iconic things about Spain. The many and varied cultures that have gone into the making of Spain, those of the Castilians, Catalonians, Lusitanians, Galicians, and the Gypsies, among other peoples, are renowned for their varied cuisines and prolific contributions to the world's artistic heritage. The country's Roman conquerors left their language, roads, and mountains, while many of the Roman Empire's greatest rulers were Spanish. In 1492, ships under the command of Christopher Columbus reached America. For 300 years afterwards, Spanish explorers and conquerors traveled the world, claiming huge territories for the Spanish crown. For generations, Spain was arguably the richest country in the world, and certainly the most far-flung. With the steady erosion of its continental and overseas empire throughout the 18th and 19th centuries, however, Spain was all but forgotten in world affairs. But while Spain has lost its empire, the country was thriving in art since the Renaissance days. Artists like Salvador Dali, the prominent figure of the Surrealism movement, who created the most famous masterpieces such as The Persistence of Memory. Disney even collaborated with him at one point, by the way. But Spain's biggest artist was Pablo Picasso, who went on to become the most influential artist of the 20th century. He broke the practices of the past and co-pioneered the art movement Cubism that revolutionized European painting and sculpture. Pablo Picasso is undoubtedly the most famous Spanish artist, and many regard him as the greatest painter of all time. You can also thank him for indirectly influencing the UPA style in animation, that later led to many abstract cartoons, most notably by Hanna-Barbera and then later Cartoon Network. You can watch another video we made on history of styles of animation for more detail, but for now, you should have enough info to dive into the world of Spanish animation. So as always, let's start off at the beginning. If we talk about the pioneer of animation, the first name that could be mentioned might actually be Segundo de Chamon. A good portion of his work was actually done in France, working with the company Pate. His optical illusions and camera tricks have led de Chamon to being compared to renowned filmmaker Georges Méliès. What connects him to animation is that in many of his shorts, he would add some scene that requires stop motion to create the required effect, like moving furniture, for example. The first live-action short film he employed the stop motion effect was The House of Ghosts. He also used the technique in The Electric Hotel, which is considered to be one of the earliest uses of pixelation. Chamon did have one fully animated stop-motion short in 1906 that was called Bob's Electric Theater. As for what was considered the first animated creation that was made within Spain, there is some debate. Initially, it was considered that The Phenomenal Bull by Fernando Marco was the first animated short. However, some have pointed to a short that was created 2 years earlier, and that's The Apache of London by Juan Solá Mestres. Unfortunately for these two shorts, it almost doesn't matter because they both are now considered lost. Some other animators like Artur Moreno also came into the picture. Moreno helped companies like Chocolate Nelia advertise their chocolates through animated short films. Enric Fenran graduated as a doctor but never worked as such. He instead gained an interest for animation, practicing by animating advertisements for the radios developed by RCA. The animation in some of these commercials are reminiscent of Disney and Fleischer. Some even used some of those companies' techniques, like rotoscoping. Many advertisements such as these are lost or hard to find. Some firsts in Spanish animation are lost as well, but some still survive somewhat. Before we get into one of these firsts, however, we need to look at the company that created it. One day, three up-and-coming animators, Ricardo Garcia, better known by the pen name Keito, Joaquin Saudaro, and Antonio Got, all met each other, and together they co-founded the company Sociedad Española de Dibujos Animados, or Spanish Animated Cartoon Company, or SEDA, in 1932. SEDA is Spain's first first animation production company. There, Keito, Saudaro, and God created short films that featured political and comic themes. One of these films features a first in Spanish animation that still seems to exist, and that is Francisca the Femme Fatale, and it was considered to be one of the first shorts to star a female character with a name and a defined personality. Francisca the Femme Fatale was named after Francisca Bohigas, a right-wing Catholic member of parliament. Though Quijito shared many of her political ideals, she was satirized as a sexual predator in the short due to her pioneering role as a woman in politics. Later on, Seda helped animation in Spain shift more towards political satires. During the interwar period, Joaquín Sadaro became the best-known animator. He created his first film, The Adventures of Jim Trot, and the first animated Spanish sci-fi film, The Formula of Dr. Nap. These products seem to be unfortunately lost. After his first film within Seda, however, Sadaro passed away. 3 other films were made after his death by fellow employees, but they did not seem to leave an impact, and the 4th one was left unfinished. People like Jose Escobar soon appeared and experimented with animation, like Escobar's The Little Rat That Swept the Stairs. Escobar had to use an outdated technique of drawings and paper being erased and drawn each frame, due to the budget being low for an amateur animated production. Escobar also created the comic book characters Zippy and Zappe, which got their own cartoon decades later, and even a movie titled The Monstrous Adventures of Zippy and Zappe. Their names derived from the Spanish word zipizape, which means chaos or turmoil. In the 1930s, Salvador Gijon helped get stop-motion animation to become more prominent in Spain with his own projects. Other people made their own stop-motion shorts, the results being The Intrepid Raúl, Pipa and Pipa, In Search of Cocolin, and Art, Love and Steaks. However, within a few months, animation took a backseat due to the country's own civil war. When the civil war ended, a dictatorship took over the business of animation, and 2 new studios emerged in Barcelona. Hispanographic Films and Ipsono Films were founded by Jaume Bagunya and Alejandro Fernández de la Reguera, respectively. Bagunya was the son of an editor on the children's magazine En Patufé or Tom Thumb, while Reguera was an editor on housewife journals like El Hogar y la Moda or Home and Fashion, and Lecturas or Readings in English. When running the studios, Bagunya used techniques similar to ones crafted before, like the stereoptical process developed by Max Fleischer. It is where a celluloid hand-drawn character is moved on a miniature set that makes the scenery look three-dimensional. Reguera, on the other hand, used what he had in his creation process. He took a motion picture camera and added a push button from a cash register to add a frame-by-frame shooting mechanism to aid his productions. In Hispanographic Films, they created a series of shorts starring the character Juanito Milombres, based on the Catalan character Juan Milomes, also known as Jack the Giant Killer. These shorts started with The Magic Island in 1940 or 1942. In Ipsono Films' case, they created their own series of cartoons. The most popular series starred the character Don Cleque, an unlikely adventurer who was the main protagonist in about 8 animated shorts. The Spanish animation technology soon improved after the war, and they began using the process where the scenery was made on paper, while the characters were made on celluloids. The cell system standardized production in Spanish animation. Eventually, the 2 entities pulled their resources together and merged into one company. Soon, the names Hispanographic Films and Ipsono Films became one studio, known as Dibujos Animados Chamartín. The studio produced about 35 animated short films, including the continuation of the Don Cleque character and some animated advertisements. The animation produced in Spain was used to help spread propaganda about the idea of national self-sufficiency. Some awards, like the ones handed out by the Sindicato Nacional del Espectáculo, also known as the National Entertainment Union, were given out to these animated products to further solidify their importance and therefore the ideas they represent and portray to the nation. Another studio was coming up with their own animated products around this time, and this studio was called Cinematografía Española Internacional de Dibujos Animados, or International Spanish Cinematography of Animated Cartoons, or CIDA. The firm was created by Francesco Ravira Belletta, who is a future producer of an Oscar-nominated film, Los Tarantos. Ravira Belletta initially started at CIFESA, producing animated short films for the company. When he created CIDA, his first short was made in 1942 about a fakir named Gonzalez, and the short was titled Fakir Gonzalez in the Jungle. Jose Escobar did some work at the studio studio and was so happy with the short that he created his own one-page comic strip based on the short, Carpanta and the Savages. The comic was controversial to the Spanish government, however. The thin Carpanta depicted in the comic seems like an allegory for the post-war hunger the Spanish population suffered from. The Spanish dictatorship claimed that nobody went hungry after the war, so the dictatorship's censors attempted to ban the Carpanta comics because they seemed to go against the supposed claim that the Spanish people did not suffer from hunger. Jose Escobar did not let the forceful censorship dissuade him from continuing on with his works. He was still creating his own animated properties while working for other companies like Hispanographic Films and, as previously mentioned, Seda. His most famous ended up being Civilon, about a peaceful, honest bull who was able to trick bullfighters numerous times. In 1945, Spain soon had its first animated feature, Garbancito of La Mancha, by Artur Moreno. It has also been known as The Enchanted Sword. The movie premiered in Barcelona and it was made in the outskirts of Barcelona from the Ballet and Blay studio. The producers of the movie and the owners of Ballet and Blay were Ramon Ballet and Jose Maria Blay. Garbancito has the distinction of being the first cel animated movie in Europe. It is also the first one of its kind in color, which it achieved by using Defy Color. While it is mostly seen as being loosely based on Don Quixote, Garbancito follows a child who, with the help of a fairy godmother and a goat, has to save his friends from a giant. The success of the Garbancito movie laid in its justification the values of an authoritative regime. Some Spanish writers at the time heavily criticized Disney and Fleischer for merely trying to entertain audiences and not trying to instill moral values in these works. Of course, what these critics would consider moral values would align more with their fascist senses based on what governed Spain at that point. In Garbancito, the title character carries a sword that exemplifies Spain's glorious past. Through actions and even dialogue, Garbancito is picking up the self-sacrifice of her soldiers that Spain's dictatorship would often put on a pedestal. Garbancito was praised heavily in the time it was released. Ballet and Blay also apparently had connections to top officials of the regime, so that helped in getting the funds for the budget of the movie. The connections also allowed the producers to be given 9 licenses to import and distribute Hollywood films. However, by the end of the 1940s, that praise slowly withered away as the dictatorial system died out, and the values that Garbancito tried to instill into the public were beginning to be viewed negatively in the following years. Garbancito of La Mancha was a film that was shaped by the backgrounds of both the production company and scriptwriter, morphing the way the animated film lent itself to propaganda. The film has been analyzed as an attempt by the authoritarian regime to inject national pride into the country that was agonized by poverty. Ballet and Blay went on to make 2 more animated films within the next few years, Happy Vacations in 1948 and The Dreams of Taipei in 1952. While the former film did get a wide theatrical release in Spain, the latter did not get quite as wide of an exposure in the country, and not much of Taipei seems to be easily available anymore. Happy Vacations is an animation live-action hybrid and a pseudo-sequel to Garbancito. It features the characters from the previous movie touring around Spain, similar to that of the Disney feature, The Three Caballeros, but the studio did not have the expertise to carefully craft the 2 mediums of animation and live action together. The reviews ended up less enthusiastic when compared to the previous animated movie as a result. Taipei stuck to traditional animation and avoided Garbancito's moralizing. Instead, this movie opted for a simple, self-contained tale, where animals are trying to take back their island. The film recovered some of the spirit of Garbancito, but also felt fresh and even sometimes surreal. Oh, and Taipei had also music hall-like themes, and that, combined with the anthropomorphic animals as stars of the feature, gave it a naturalness and originality that other animated films in Spain did not seem to have at the time. In the meantime, Jaun Bagunya decided to leave Dibujos Animados Chamartín and founded Bagunya Hermanos, SL. This new firm was seeking to create educational and scientific animation. Later on, the team from Chamartín moved to Estella Films, and Bagunya just happened to have a project transferred to the owner of Estella Films, Felix Millet Maristani. Bagunya was trying to focus on making his own version of a classic fairy tale. The tale in question was Cinderella. When Estella Films got a hold of it, the film became a branch of a larger issue, protecting the people of Catalonia. Catalonia is a region in the northeastern corner of Spain, and the Catalan culture, language, and identity at the time were greatly threatened by the policies of Spain's dictatorship. Without using the language or any references to contemporary events, the film had to symbolize Catalan resistance. The Catalan dancing company Les Bart Vendaguer performed rotoscope dances used within the film. Also notable is that members of the quartet vocal Orpheus and the Capella de Música del FAD, both choirs that were banned from ever singing the Catalan language, provided vocals for the film's soundtrack. Even real Catalan places like Barcelona's City Hall and Plaza Real or Royal Square make appearances in the film. It was clear that the Cinderella project was used to stand up for Catalonia. A few people gained interest in animation through this project, like Félix Millet Maristany and even Alexandre Cirisi Pellicer, an art critic who returned from exile. Pellicer ended up becoming the director of the film. There were many high hopes for this project, but it still had one noticeable drawback before the film's release. Even though the tale is clearly based on Cinderella, Walt Disney got wind of the project and quote-unquote suggested that the Cinderella name should not be used, as he was making his own Cinderella movie around the same time. To accommodate this change, this Cinderella film was instead titled Once Upon a Time, though some people to this day have still called it the Catalan Cinderella. Once Upon a Time made quite a few achievements for itself. As mentioned before, it used rotoscoping to its advantage, which, if you do not know, is basically tracing animation over a human performer's movements. Once Upon a Time was certainly not the first animated production to use this technique, but it did help enrich the movie and make Cinderella and the Prince look credible cinematically. Nearly everyone else was drawn humorously by José Escobar, often being used for slapstick techniques to produce funny scenes within the movie. The multiplane camera technique was also used in Once Upon a Time. This technique has been well used by Disney and had also been previously used in Garbancita of La Mancha. How this technique works is that each glass slide was separated from the others. As the camera moved, the glass slides were animated at different speeds depending on the distance of the camera. The resulting effect was that the closer an object is to the beholder, the quicker it seems to move. The multiplane camera produced the humanized distortion of the horizon, as distance blurs scenery and objects in the real world. The Spanish animators were forced to build their own equipment, as there was no company in Spain to sell the necessary parts to them. There was trial and error done with the films that used it, like with Garbancito of La Mancha. In regards to Once Upon a Time, Alexandre Cirisi Pellicer experimented with the bonds between the celluloid and the miniature set, and his and Enric Ferran's combined efforts managed to get the camera to move in and out of the set, depending on the placement of the rails the camera is set on. To help with the production of Once Upon a Time, Josep Benet, producer on the film, contacted the owner of Catalonia's main film laboratories and shooting sets. The owner's name was Daniel Aragonès, the co-founder of Aragonès y Pujol SL, along with Antoni Pujol. The company was the first film developing and processing lab that supplies clients all over Spain. Aragonès and Pujol provided the place to film the dances and miniature sets by using their own company, Orfea Films. Since they also did not have a patented Technicolor, the company also provided an alternative coloring system called Cinephotocolor. Technicolor and Cinephotocolor are similar in that they simultaneously shoot on 2 or 3 different supports that move in a synchronized fashion inside special cameras. These cameras have half-reflective prisms inside them, and they divided the image by colors and directed it to each negative. In between the prism and the negative are special filters, which ensure only a selected color range was printed. Cinephotocolor's prism split the light through 2 filters, blue, purple, and red-orange. Pellicer stressed the importance of color in the cartoon, mentioning how color can help amplify moods in different scenes. Examples he gave included red expressing humor, blue expressing tenderness, and yellow expressing magnificence. And yes, the clips shown in this video are in black and white, but that is unfortunately because the original colored version is apparently lost. The Cinephotocolor system soon was rendered obsolete. This was not only because of advancing technologies, but also because of the period of Spanish isolation. And so the event that gave the introduction to the system came to an end. Despite the Spanish Civil War, World War II, and Spain's fascist dictatorship, the golden age of Spanish animation still took place. This dictatorship forced censorship, ideology repression, and suppression of most other languages in the country, but creators still did their best to work around it. The end of the 1940s saw negotiations with American leaders, which led to Spain's government no longer funding the production of their own animated films. So by 1951, the golden age of Spanish animation came to an end. The industry did not want to support the regime they were under and struggled to keep afloat. Estela Films in particular got hit with trouble from political involvements of its members and competition from bigger studios like Disney. The dictatorship of Francisco Franco forced the main Spanish language to be Castilian, while the other languages like Basque, Galician, and Catalan are repressed. Franco's rule was completely completely totalitarian. On the animation side of things, Franco's authoritarian regime made it quite difficult to set up business outside of Madrid. Animators like Jose Escobar quit animation because they did not want to move to work in Madrid. Estella Films closed down its art department in Barcelona and never went back to animation to this day. Most of the artists of that time ended up sticking to comic books. However, even though the golden age is over, that does not mean animation has gone from Spain forever. During the Francoist era, new animators began to crop up over the years and displayed their craft through producing cartoon commercials on TV. One of the most famous series of commercials would have to be the one starring the Telerin family, created by Jose Luis Moro. These characters were popular enough to be featured in a movie, which we will get to in a moment, and even received a CGI reboot known as Cleo and Cuquín in recent years. Estudios Moro and Estudios Vara were also established around this time, and as they continued their work, they eventually produced at least 2 animated features. These features are The Wizard of Dreams in 1966 and The Wardrobe of Time in 1971. The former film featured the Telerin family in their big screen debut. Some other animations came based on comic characters like Mort and Phil, or should I say Mortadello and Filemon. The bold, tall disguised Master Mortadello and the short, pudgy, bossy Filemon were once detectives, and now they're secret agents of TIA, which stands for Técnicos de Investigación Aeroterráquea, or Aeroterrestrial Investigation Technicians. They had compilation movies, Festival of Mortadello and Filemon and Second Festival of Mortadello and Filemon. These 2 movies were put together by using 16 short films directed by Rafael Vara. Vara later made a full movie starring the duo, the previously mentioned The Wardrobe of Time. A TV show was made in 1994 by BRB International, titled Mortadello and Filemon, and it has an English dub, but only in the UK. Finally, there was also a CGI film in 2014 titled Mortadello and Filemon, Mission Implausible, directed by live-action director Javier Fesser, who also directed a live-action Mortadello and Filemon movie. Getting back to the 60s and 70s, one animator started to make his mark in the Spanish film industry, and that man was Cruz Delgado, a comic book artist who started work on animation in Estudios Moro and then went on to create his own studios. He first directed his own first short film adaptation, Puss in Boots, in 1964. He also worked on advertisements and other short films. Later, Delgado went on to create his own movie, Directing Magical Adventure, in 1973. However, it was partially edited together by using the Puss in Boots short, as well as another short from 1968 that was also titled Magical Adventure. Cruz later made his next movie project in 1978, completely without editing in old footage. This movie is known as The Attic of Fantasy. Cruz also had a hand in his own animation for television. His first was Molecula in 1968. It was followed by The Four Musicians of Bremen and Don Quixote of La Mancha. Both are based on classic tales. The former got turned into a movie called Town Musicians of Bremen, which was the first to win the Goya Award for Best Animated Feature. The latter was considered to be the first largely successful animated show for Spain. There was some other artists, such as Manuel García Ferrer, who was born in Almería, Spain, but he later moved to Argentina. He later created his own animated projects like the TV series The Adventures of Hijitus that began in 1967, based on the Argentinian comic character Hijitus. Ferrer also created a movie of the same name in 1973, and he has made a few other movies as well. He made Antiojito and Antifaz, 1,000 Attempts and One Invention in 1972, Trapito in 1975, Ico the Brave Horse in 1987, Manuelita in 1999, Heart, The Joys of Pantristeni in 2000, and Soledad and Largo y Rucho in 2012. I could get into more detail here, but since these were all in Argentina, it's best to elaborate more when we get to that country. Later on, in the period of the new rise in animation, underground animation began to take shape. This included the first abstract direct, camera-less feature ever. Jose Antonio Sistiaga's 1970 film Ere Herrera Baleibo Esek Subua Aruaren. The title is a set of words with no real meaning. It is simply the first and only movie in the history of Spain that is hand-painted directly onto celluloid. Spain was also entering a transition into democracy in this decade, and during that time, the first Spanish feature restricted for adults was released, Stories of Love and Slaughter, in 1979. The Spanish also decided to try some collaborations with other countries. One notable collaboration effort came from BRB International. This company got its name from the first letters of the last names of its three founders. They were Tito Basto, Jose Rodriguez, and Claudio Biernboyd. The company started off with getting the distribution rights for popular foreign cartoons like the Pink Panther and Tom and Jerry, and even the library of Warner Brothers and Hanna-Barbera cartoons. They then went to the Japanese company Nippon Animation in 1975, gaining the license for their animated television shows to distribute them in Spain and worldwide. The shows included Monarch, The Big Bear of Talak, Banner Tale, The Story of Gray Squirrel, and The Adventures of Tom Sawyer, which began a good relationship between BRB and Nippon. This collaboration saw the beginning of the creation of BRB's own shows, except Nippon would assist in animating these projects. The result of this collaboration led to three shows. The first is Rui, the Little Cid. Rui is based upon the 11th century Spanish hero, El Cid. It received a movie in 2002 called Rui, the Knight with the Wooden Sword. The second show is D'Artagnan and the Three Muskehounds, clearly a take on the 1844 Alexandre Dumas novel The Three Musketeers, the name D'Artagnan being similar to the name of the novel's lead, D'Artagnan. The characters are animals in this adaptation, mainly dogs. D'Artagnan became popular enough that it resulted in a TV special edited from the show called D'Artagnan Special, and a sequel series called The Return of D'Artagnan. Then there's another TV special edited from the sequel series titled D'Artagnan, One for All and All for One, and decades later a CGI movie also titled D'Artagnan and the Three Muskehounds. The last show to come out of the BRB and Nippon collaboration is Around the World with Willy Fogg. This show is based on the 1873 Jules Verne story Around the World in 80 Days. This adaptation also has the characters as anthropomorphic animals like D'Artagnan, and there is much more variety. The main trio are felines, while the main antagonists are canines. The series is not so well remembered in the United States, but it was fondly remembered in the United Kingdom. Willy Fogg was popular enough to get a sequel, simply titled Willy Fogg 2. The sequel has the characters take part in the other Jules Verne stories like 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea and Journey to the Center of the Earth. After finding their footing with these shows, BRB International went to the Taiwanese animation company Wang Film Productions, and the two companies collaborated together to create Spain's first international hit, The World of David the Gnome. The show is based on the book The Secret Book of Gnomes by Rien Poortvliet and Wil Huyten, which previously had a one-hour TV special adaptation simply titled Gnomes in 1980. The World of David the Gnome originally aired from 1985 to 1986, and later aired in an English dub produced by Cinar and Miramax Films. The dub aired on Nickelodeon through Nick Jr., starring in 1988, and it featured pretty notable actors like Tom Bosley and Christopher Plummer. The series stars David, a gnome who is a doctor who goes around and heals patients, like animals and other gnomes. The series gained enough popularity that a follow-up was made called Wisdom of the Gnomes, which stars a gnome named Klaus. There was also a movie called The Gnome's Great Adventure, which was directed by Harvey Weinstein, of all people, but it seems to be pretty difficult to find this movie. There were other movies like The Tiny Little World of David the Gnome, The Gnome's Amazing Journeys, and The Gnome's Adventures in the Snow, and even a 1995 read-up of their first movie. A retelling of the show was later made in 1997, titled The New World of the Gnomes. This show has a greater emphasis on preserving nature and then modern-day pollution, possibly due to being a collaboration production with the World Wildlife Foundation. As far as television is concerned, there are still a few notable works made from Spain. BRB International still continued television work and collaborated with other countries like with France for the Mozart Band and Italy for Fantagiro. They have even worked with both countries on the show The Invisible Man, working with Moonscoop Group and Rai Fiction. They have also made shows on their own, some of which are anthropomorphized animal versions of old stories like Sandokan and The Untouchables of Elliot Mouse. These two also received movies, Sandokan, The Princess and the Pirate, and Elliot Mouse, The Untouchables vs. El Catone. Some adaptations were not anthropomorphized, like Boba Bob's, based on the children's story by Henk and Narida Zwart. It was about a group of miniature humanoid aliens who head out to Earth and protect the inhabitants from dinosaurs, while making stops at other planets along the way. There were also more original works from them, like Gladiator Academy and Nico, or Nicholas, the latter of which was made to teach children about blind people and how to make places more blind-friendly. These also received movies, Nico or Nicholas, the TV movie, and Gladiator Academy, the movie. BRB even made IMP, a stylized black and white show about an imp trying to spread sin, but is small and not so great as he thinks he is at his job. Imp was initially made as a pilot for Cartoon Network's Sunday Pants before having its own show. There are some other shows that were not made by BRB that still made an impact. There was a show called 10+2 about a place called Numberland. In it is a school taught by a mouse named Aristotle and his assistant named Infinite. The students are the anthropomorphized numbers 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, and 9, and all of them have different personalities. Most of the time these characters are mute and communicate through body language and noises. This show was popular enough to have a few movies: The Magical Night, The Great Secret, and Letters and Pirates. The Great Secret managed to gain a Goya Award nomination for Best Animated Feature. The company that made this show is Aksino, which created some animation that is pretty smooth and close to something that Disney would make. They have also made their own movies. One is Dragon Hill, which won a Goya Award for Best Animated Feature and has a sequel called The Magic Cube. Another is El Cid, the Legend, based on the real-life Spanish hero and also a winner of the Best Animated Feature Goya Award. They also have The Three Wise Men, based on the tale of the three wise men who traveled to the baby Jesus to give him gifts, and was nominated for the Best Animated Feature Goya Award. Finally, there is The Aviators, about messenger pigeons during World War I, which also got a Goya Award nomination. These movies have sometimes blended 2D animation with some 3D backgrounds and models, though some of these films do it better than others. Speaking of blending 2D with 3D, another Spanish TV series is called Scruff, based on a book by Josep Vallverdum about a little puppy named Scruff adopted by a farmer. This is notable for using Toon Boom's Harmony software in order to help create a show with 2D characters that are implemented onto 3D backgrounds. A Flash web series that came out from Spain is Calico Electrónico, a comedy about a superhero who fits every archetype that is the opposite of what a superhero is seen as: small, fat, and no powers. He fights crime in Electronic City by using gadgets from the Electronica web store. Some other Spanish shows have experimented by basing their style off of anime, like the Ithun Chronicles and Virtual Hero. These are not Spain's first attempts at anime-esque projects, but we'll get back to that a little later. Another show of interest is Marcelino Bread and Wine, which is based off a 1953 novel of the same name and the 1955 film Miracle of Marcelino. It is a Franco-Mexican, Italian-Spanish-Japanese co-production, which involved Nippon Animation, but not BRB International this time. One other show to mention is The Triplets. The Catalan show was created by Roser Capdevila, based on stories from 1983, which were based on Capdevila's own triplets in 1969. A character named the Bored Witch was added to the books in 1985 and also appeared in the show. The cartoon of the triplets first aired in 1997 and became successful enough that there was a Bored Witch spin-off and another spin-off called The Baby Triplets. There have been CGI shows as well, one of which is the first ever co-production between Spain and Russia. It is an animated Minecraft-looking educational series called Yoko. Some other CGI shows include Pumpkin Reports, Sendokai Champions, Jelly Jam, and even for little children, Pocoyo. Getting back to films now, it was in the 1980s that an autonomous system was implemented, which diversified the feature productions, and the films being produced had some basis of local traditions. For example, the 1985 film The Magic Pumpkin was made in Euskadi and based in Euskadi culture. The 1990 film Despertaferro was made in Catalonia and based in Catalonian culture. There was also a film called Per Austrinia 2004, which is the first animated film to be recorded entirely in the Catalan language. Also notable around this era was the 1984 film Katie the Caterpillar. It was a co-production with Mexico, one of the few animated films made there, and it was quite successful in its run. It was written by Silvia Roche, based on her own original story, except it was called Pepina the Caterpillar. The story is that Katie decides to leave the cherry leaf tree she lives in and journey around the forest in order to figure out what she wants to be. The success led to quite a bit of merchandise, and there was even a song by Lucerito, which was made to take advantage of the film's success. Katie eventually gained a sequel titled Katie, Kiki and Coco, also known as Katie Meets the Aliens and Katie and the Caterpillar Kids. The plot is about Katie and her two children, Kiki and Coco, protecting the forest from aliens that came down to eat them. While the success was nice then for animation, the feature films started to die down, and not much of note was released in the early 90s. Only thing that made any sort of impact was The Legend of the North Wind. The North Wind got trapped in a pot long ago, and a man named Atanasio wants to release it for its own purposes. But Watuna, Ane, and Peyot, the descendants of the people who trapped the North Wind, attempt to stop him before it is too late. Yeah, we've seen hundreds of shows with the same premise, but look, the animation is great here. It made enough of an impact that a sequel was made, titled The Return of the North Wind, and it won the second Goya Award for Best Animated Feature. There was also a TV series based on the North Wind films, but the film that seemed to bring a spark and interest in animation was Megasonicos, a CGI animated film. Actually, it is not only Spain's first animated CGI feature, it has also been said to be Europe's first animated CGI feature film. It is a plot about a tyrant of a space galaxy that can only be defeated through the power of music. Some other films began some experimenting, like the 1998 film Our Animal Neighbors, which had a more abstract look to its animation and won a Goya Award. Another example is the 1999 film Child's Play, or Juego de Niños, so as not to confuse it with the horror movie. It is actually Spain's first stop-motion feature film, which is about a young orphan named Sarah, who has psychokinetic powers and uses them to survive attacks from alien invaders. Soon, Spanish production in animated films shot back up. More films of different varieties were getting produced, like The Island of a Crab, which is about a pirate crew facing off against slave traders in order to rescue a lady and find treasure. Then came the 2001 film The Living Forest, which became Spain's first CGI project to be widely distributed to other countries and successful enough to get a sequel, Spirit of the Forest. However, traditional 2D animated films were still dominating the first half of the 2000s. There were many that were inspired more by American animation, like 2002's Time Gate and 2003's The Spell of the South. Some have gone a bit more experimental than what we have seen in most of animation, like 2001's A Dog Called Pain and 2007's From the Sea. Then there is 2005's Gisaku, loosely based on the famous samurai Hasekura Tsunenaga. It has been advertised as the first Spanish anime feature and was released both in Spain and in Japan nearly the same time. There have been some notable short films that came out, such as Tadeo Jones, which is about a half-witted, headstrong Indiana Jones-like explorer who ends up in the ancient Egyptian pyramids and encounters a family of mummies. It got enough of a success that a second short came in the form of Tadeo Jones and the Basement of Doom. A full movie then came in 2012 as The Adventures of Tadeo Jones, or Tad, the Lost Explorer. That too got a sequel, and it was called Tadeo Jones 2, The Secret of King Midas. Another notable short film is 2009's The Lady and the Reaper, which received an Academy Award nomination. It is about an old woman who longs for death to reunite with her husband, and the Reaper is about to take her, but a doctor brings her back. This causes a fight between the Reaper and Doctor, thus chaos ensues. Of course, like most other countries, CGI ended up dominating the industry. The Spanish often collaborated with other countries to create these CGI films, like with Great Britain, creating movies like The Missing Links and Justin and the Knights of Valor. There was even a co-production with Spain, the United Kingdom, and the United States that was considered an ambitious project, with a budget of $70 million. That project was Planet 51, though it was also a movie that flopped pretty badly. Spain later got more into producing their own projects with the backing of television networks, and this resulted in The Adventures of Tadeo Jones and Capture the Flag. Some other live-action filmmakers also tried their hand at animation. I already mentioned Javier Fesser making Mortadelo and Filemon, Mission Implausible, but there is also Argentinian director Juan José Campanella, who won an Academy Award for The Secret in Their Eyes. His project was a co-production with Spain, titled Metagol, or The Unbeatables, or Underdogs. It is loosely based on a short story called Memoirs of a Right-Winger. It is about a boy named Jake trying to save his town from getting turned into a sports stadium, and so the plastic figures from his football stadium come to life to help Jake. Spain still tries their hands with other forms of animation and collaborating with other countries. Examples include France's 2007 film Nocturna, about an orphan who goes to a magical nighttime realm to stop the stars from being extinguished by a shadowy villain, and Michel Ocelot's Azur and Asmar, about two princes who journey to find a legendary genie fairy. Some films try to go for a more horror route, like 2007's Screams in the Hallway, also known as Going Nuts. and 2012's The Apostle. One horror-type director made his works using claymation. This director is Samuel Ortimarti, and he directed the shorts Werepig, Attack of the Killer Critters, Vicenta, and Routine the Prohibition. His most notable work is his feature film, Possessed, which is essentially a parody of The Exorcist. It is about a famous flamenco dancer who thinks her son is possessed and calls an exorcist to help save her son. The only problem is that he is losing faith, but the dancer has no other options. There are also some traditional animated films that go for a more serious, adult take, like with Chico and Rita, Wrinkles, Bird Boy, The Forgotten Children, and Buñuel in The Labyrinth of the Turtles. The Academy Award-nominated Chico and Rita is about a piano player and a singer who meet one day and unite romantically. But their journey for success leads to much anguish and heartache. Wrinkles is based on the comic book of the same title by Paco Roca and is about the friendship of two elderly men, one of them beginning to get Alzheimer's disease. Bird Boy, The Forgotten Children is the follow-up to the 2011 short film Bird Boy. It is also based on the comic Psiconautas by Alberto Vázquez. It follows the shy Bird Boy, an outcast within a post-apocalyptic society. Alberto also has other short films released before and after Bird Boy. They are Ramiro Dirty Rat, Unicorn Blood, Decorado or Decorated, and Homeless Home. Buñuel in The Labyrinth of the Turtles is based on the graphic novel of the same name by Fermín Solís. It is a biographical animated film revolving around the making of a 1933 film, Land Without Bread, and the co-director, co-writer, and co-producer of the film, Luis Buñuel. But then there is a film that seems to work for both children and adults, and that is Klaus. Klaus is the passion project by Sergio Pablos, an animator who worked since the 90s, and came up with original ideas for Smallfoot and the first Despicable Me. Klaus is an alternate history of the origin of Santa Claus, involving a man named Jesper, who fails to get a town on an island interested in postal services, until he meets the titular toy-making recluse and forms an unlikely bond with the man. Pablos wanted to create an animated film that would try to see how traditional animation would have evolved if it wasn't for CGI. He focused on volumetric and organic lighting and texturing to overcome some of traditional animation's limitations, but still keep the handcrafted feel of the medium. It is good to see someone experiment with traditional animation and keep it alive. His efforts were picked up by Netflix, and it became one of Netflix's first Academy Award nominated features. So we have seen that the Spanish came a long way. They worked with what they had and worked around wars and under pretty strict rules. They managed to forge their own path in some successful animation, though that seems to be at the cost of some creativity and good writing. Now I know most people think of America or Japan when they think of animation, but since animation in these countries has been mostly in the state of decay for years now, thanks to the modern economy and of course the woke, low-budget trash that is on Netflix and other streaming services, I think it is time we look elsewhere and try to discover some animated masterpieces of various nations that most people never even heard of. There's plenty to watch for every type of audience, and lots of it has aged very gracefully to this day. So I hope you found something that piqued your interest in this video, and remember that if some of these works are not available to consume legally, you can always watch them on plenty of pirated streaming sites. This can help show the companies that people look for this stuff, and maybe these companies can start releasing more of these vintage works on DVDs, or have them on official streaming sites. Just please make sure to leave a comment under this video, as it takes forever to make such stuff, so I'm curious to read your thoughts. So then, this has been Anton, and you've been watching Foreign Antoons. Adios.